Okay, what's up YouTube? Once again, my name is Kellen, this is Killing for Company. I'm back doing I guess I want to call it a regular video, just because I've been up to the streaming so much as of late, but if you're stopping by, first time to the channel, thank you so much. This video is going to be a response video slash conversation piece surrounding essentially a conversation that I've been having with fellow YouTubers, and it's kind of been about the new wave of traditional heavy metal. Now this, more specifically, I'm going to turn that up a little bit, is going to be in response to a video that Alan over at Let's Talk Metal made a while back, and I wanted to, after watching his video, I was gonna do a response, just leave a comment, you know, a few little notes. Here's what I thought of your video, so on and so forth. You know, my takes, my interpretation, and then as soon as I got to, you know, writing, I thought there's too much that I want to say, so I'm gonna make a video instead. Now, because this is gonna be directed to Alan, and I hope this is to extend an olive branch to make sure any point of disagreement between the two of us is done in a kind and friendly affair. We've got Atlantean Codex. If you know Alan at all, he's all about this band. So this is the White Goddess. And that'll be playing in the background for us. And hopefully if you see this, Alan, you understand that all this is meant and coming from a place, and from a good place. So not too hostile. Okay. If you take issue with anything I have to say, just tune into Atlantean in the background and we'll be good. But there are a few things that Alan laid out in his video that when I was watching it initially, I thought he is coming from a very different place. Now, Alan has a couple of years on me and a whole lot more heavy metal listening experience. So naturally our perspectives are going to be a little bit different. But I think he did a major service in terms of trying to narrow down the framework for how we understand this essential movement that is going on right now and has been exploding for the past few years, especially. Now, that said framework, one of the first things or points that he makes, and I've got some notes here that if you see me looking away, I'm referring to my notes, is that he said that, point number one, the new wave of traditional heavy metal does not refer to every single heavy metal band that is playing in a so-called traditional style now, right? Which I think is fair. Right? Just because you have metal with sung vocals shouldn't automatically qualify you to be part of the new wave of traditional heavy metal, which is fair. And he goes on to describe bands that are playing in essentially an era, which is kind of he says 83, 84. Now remember that, because that'll be an important point of contention and will ground sort of this video. So 1983, 84. The reason being is that it's before heavy metal really starts to divide into more and more subgenres. That in the 85, 86, not only has really, I mean, you could say 83, 84 thrash has come into play. But I think, to his point, for many fans, around that time period, 83, 84, there was this general term heavy metal, which I think if we were to dig a little bit deeper would be about how metal had cleanly separated through the new wave of British heavy metal, had separated from sort of blues-oriented rock, right? And prog, and there was something new happening that had splintered cleanly, to enough to an extent to form a brand new genre, thus heavy metal. By 83, 84, that is rock solid, right? So I think that's why he chooses this time period. The new wave of British heavy metal has made enough of an impact and enough influence that bands like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, probably other bands that I think I would group into that would be, he mentioned Picture, which I thought that was, a little bit of a deeper cut, but for those a bit more well-established bands that I think serve as major influences for the kind of bands that we're referring to in this space, are, Dio or Accept, for example, right? Like, they're all coming out with important albums in this time period. And the bands that would cleanly today, within the new wave of traditional heavy metal, be understood as, perfect examples that epitomize this sound, right? Now, he mentioned, I'm going to have a few examples here. Now, in recent years, these are bands that I think illustrate his point. He mentioned this is the newest release from Sin Starlet with Solid Source of Steel. Killer band. This is the debut EP from Venator. And this was a split that also has Angel Blade there for you. But Venator this past year has released their debut full length. But once again, I think like Sin Starlet and the band that follows here, Ambush with Infidel, these bands are perfect examples of sounds that epitomize what I think is inferred when we say that 83, 84 traditional heavy metal sound, right? They're comfortably in that spot, which is completely fair. Now, what's interesting is he, in contrast, says a band like Crypt Sermon should not be considered part of the new wave of traditional heavy metal. Point being is they're kind of a doom or epic doom band, right? And they don't, their main sources of influence are not Accept or Iron Maiden or Judas Priest or Picture, for that matter, right? I thought that was a really interesting point because for me, they are a perfect example of what makes the new wave of traditional heavy metal different, and why I think my perspective maybe, or I should say just metal fans of my generation and potentially younger, may have a different lens or point of criticism in terms of how we understand the new wave of traditional heavy metal. And I'll kind of get there in a second. But the next point that Alan made, because I wanted to continue this, is that Hammerfall in 1997, Glory to the Brave, is potentially one of the albums that really kickstarted this movement. That at the end of the 90s, traditional heavy metal is pretty much dead, right? In a lot of ways, through the 90s, it was not a popular, it was very difficult to find bands who were playing in a traditional heavy metal style. And my series that I've kind of done a couple episodes now on what I'm calling Blood from Stone. That the first episode was on Cauldron Born, and the second one was on Skullview. Bands that sort of came out in the late 90s from America and were playing with traditional heavy metal sort of genres. Essentially, that bands from that era, at the end of the 90s, as we get moving into the 2000s, could potentially be grouped in with the new wave of traditional heavy metal. But more specifically to his point about Hammerfall, like that was an incredibly important album, in his opinion, that galvanized a whole lot of interest for a more traditional heavy metal sound by comparison to the more extreme sound that was happening within the metal underground. So we have the two sides in terms of how he understands what the new wave of traditional heavy metal is, and there's some variation in his video. I will link to it in the description so you get a chance to watch it if you have not seen it, because it's a great video. And secondly, that Hammerfall in 97, I believe, with Glory to the Brave, is a keystone or pillar album that helps to sort of push forward what would eventually become the new wave of traditional heavy metal. So let's take I just want to pause here. I also want to get into labels, because that is going to be important for me when we get into the other side of this video, and what I think is sort of the beginning for the new wave of traditional heavy metal. In that time period from 83 to 84, if you look at probably the most important label to contribute or sign heavy metal bands that would end up sort of being important influences for the decade that follows in the 1980s, it would have to be Metal Blade, right? So your Armored Saint EP, Fate's Warning, Night on Brocken, Warlord, Deliver Us, Omen, Battle Cry, Lizzie Borden, Give 'Em the Axe, and Trouble, self-titled. All those albums come out in that time period on Metal Blade. So they're all unique, but I think if you were to pick out a single label that helped to define a traditional heavy metal sound during that time period, I'm going to say Metal Blade is the label. Now the reason I wanted to bring that up is if you were to just go through that list, Armored Saint, Fate's Warning, Warlord, Trouble, Omen, Lizzie Borden, they are all, I mean, I can understand someone saying like, yeah, they're all traditional heavy metal to some extent, but and to Alan's point, this is before fans started to divide to a greater degree and fracture all these different sort of subgenres. Now, when we look back at them, I think it's difficult to, unless you were there at that time period or at least closer in age to experience what was, metal before all these subgenre division. I can't look back at and think like they should be grouped under the same necessarily umbrella in terms of subgenre. But I can understand someone saying that they're all traditional heavy metal. And the reason I'm going to bring that up is when we get to my list, I think the bands will vary in a similar likeness. Meaning, when to only think of traditional heavy metal in the except Judas Priest, Iron Maiden vein, I think shortchanges how diverse those early heavy metal influences in 83, 84 are. and why today, when I think of the new wave of traditional heavy metal, why potentially, when I heard Alan say that a band like Crypt Sermon couldn't belong or shouldn't be described as the new wave of traditional heavy metal, I kind of had to pause and think of why that bothered me a little bit. And it's completely just a subjective, generational experience, but Crypt Sermon, I think, proves to be a perfect example. One, to my point earlier, I think the new wave of traditional heavy metal is more diverse in terms of the bands and the subgenres that inform it under that sort of umbrella. Two, Crypt Sermon, I off the top of my head, that came out on Dark Descent. And the reason that's important is I think it illustrates how the fans who had throughout the mid-aughts, mid-2000s into the early 2010s, so on and so forth, showed up to Dark Descent for extreme metal like death metal, were ready and hungry for something a bit more in the traditional heavy metal vein. And I think that's why they end up being more accepting. It proved as like another, for a lot of people in 2015, I believe, is when the debut is. It was a point of entry for a lot of metal fans. If you weren't into, song traditional heavy metal earlier, here's a epic doom band that's coming out on a death metal label. And it served to recruit, a broader fan base for traditional heavy metal that came from an extreme metal listening background, right? And I think I belong to that generation. 2015 isn't the year for me in question here, but it is, it helps to illustrate the point that I would like to make, is that there was a hunger for more traditional heavy metal, but we potentially didn't have the same kind of limitations from someone who had heard traditional heavy metal in the 80s and through the 90s potentially. For me personally, as we kind of get into the year that ends, proves pivotal, actually comes a decade later from the Hammerfall reference. So for me, it's 2008. So if you were to ask me the year of origin for traditional heavy metal or the new wave of traditional heavy metal, for me it has to be 2008. And I've grabbed a handful of records here that were incredibly important for me and helped to sort of put me on my sort of listening path or journey into the world of traditional heavy metal. It's not to say that I wasn't listening to Iron Maiden, so on and so forth, at an earlier time in my life, but it was like a very benign kind of relationship with those records. Meaning, I knew them in terms of their historical importance and I could place them on a family tree chart, but I didn't identify with them, or I didn't think that the bands that I was listening to necessarily were indebted to them to any degree. They didn't belong to my generation in the same way that a band like Morbus Chron or Ruins of Everest or Stargazer, etc., bands that I loved and still love and listen to, like I claim them to some degree as my own. But I didn't feel that way about Iron Maiden and Judas Priest. And here comes 2008, and a few records, a handful of records on my show all came about that year. And when I was trying to make up this list, more and more of them sort of popped up, and I thought, like, it's going to be important for me to narrow this down in the same way that Alan, there's plenty of sort of caveats and nuance to his position. For the sake of at least conversation and debate, I kind of wanted to focus on a particular year and what I think is the most pivotal and important for the new wave of traditional heavy metal and help to get things rolling. So before I show you the albums, I also want to get into as to why 2008 I think is an important time period. And like I said with excuse me, with Metal Blade, for me, labels that define the new wave of traditional heavy metal today, they start to appear and are signing bands and promoting them at the end of the 90s and really into the early 2000s. So there's a handful of labels today that I think are essential to the scene. No Remorse Records from Greece. Label gets started in 98. Another one that potentially most people don't think of, but in the same way that Dark Descent started to sign a band, you know, like Crypt Sermon, I Hate Records, which is out of Sweden, I believe. They were not only signing like kind of black and thrash bands, but they were also signing, you know, like Count Raven, for example, doom bands that helped to bring that side of so-called traditional heavy metal into my world. Ones that many fans may recognize: Cruz del Sur, out of Italy, and now has a sub-label, Gates of Hell. It started in 2003. And the last one that I'll mention here is High Roller Records, 2004, out of Germany. They've done a lot of reissuing of classic 80s traditional heavy metal records as well. So all of those, you know, appear in a way that I don't look at Hammerfall's Glory to the Brave and think that it should be grouped in with those labels. And much like, you know, the bands that I mentioned earlier from my Blood from Stone series, I don't think of Cauldron Born or Skullview in the same league or in the same way as being part of the new wave of traditional heavy metal. Those bands, in my opinion, Hammerfall included, I feel like we're fighting against the grain. We're swimming upstream, whatever metaphor you want to choose. They were heading in the opposite direction and sort of forged some space. But generationally, I think they should belong to that narrative. Where I look at bands that I'm going to mention here today, and the records that I'm going to pull out for you, I think they started, instead of swimming against the grain, they caught, you know, a new wave. They're riding some momentum. And I think it's decidedly different in terms of how we should critically understand them and see their role. I'm not trying to make a qualitative statement as to which one is better than the other, but I do think it's important to historically understand them as being part of different moments in traditional heavy metal's history. So that being said, I'm going to flip this record because I think it's about to go, and I'll get right back. Okay. So now that I'm back and we've kind of set the stage, Atlantean's playing in the background. We can get back to business. Okay, so there are 5 records I'm going to talk about today from 2008 that proved incredibly personal and important to me. And with each album, I don't necessarily want them to do, I won't want to do like a review of them necessarily. I'll link to them and you can listen to it if you want. But remember, we started this talking about 83 and 84. All of these bands, I don't think necessarily belong to the Judas Priest, Iron Maiden school of traditional heavy metal from that time period. And at the same time, their primary influences are from that era that we talked about, 83, 84. Their primary influences are from that time period. Albums that were released during those years, but were not part of the Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, to Sin Starlet, Ambush, Venator of today, right? They don't share that association or inference when we say the new wave of traditional heavy metal. 5 records that I'm talking about today have primary influences from 83 and 84 that are fundamentally different. Okay, so the first one that we're going to be talking about, this is the debut release. Now, if there's one band that I don't know if it was I can't say the first or that I immediately go to when I think the new wave of traditional heavy metal. It's going to be In Solitude. So this is the debut release from In Solitude. Once again, 2008. Like we were talking about with influences. So this band is not pulling from Maiden and Priest. Instead, I would have to say that when you listen to them and another Swedish band, Portrait, I think you're thinking Merciful Fate. Melissa, Don't Break the Oath, 83, 84. I don't know when people remember Merciful Fate, and probably Alan would have a better perspective on this. If the first wave of black metal was sort of critically understood or consolidated in the way that it is today, right? Well defined, if you want to call it that way. But that's when I listen to In Solitude, that's where I go as a primary influence, right? And I'm just trying to illustrate the point here with each record that I'll be showing, that we should think of Merciful Fate as being an important influence to the new wave of traditional heavy metal. Or they should be equally understood as a foundational band to the movement, to the, if you want to call it that, to the scene, if you want to be more derogatory. Nevertheless, In Solitude is undoubtedly, in my opinion, part of the younger, should be grouped in with one of the younger bands. They're now, they're no longer active anymore, but they were important during the time period. Came out with 3 full lengths, I believe, and definitely helped to introduce, Merciful Fate. And I don't know if people agree with that, but I think Melissa and Don't Break the Oath should also be seen as important to the contributing into the new wave of traditional heavy metal in the same way that Maiden and Priest are. So, In Solitude is my first pick. Self-titled release. Moving on. Okay. This kind of format or theme will be familiar. So, next one for me. I have The Wounded Kings, Embrace the Narrow House. 2008 here. I guess I probably don't need to say that anymore. You get the point. They're all from 2008. But record or band that helped to illustrate, where this band is coming from. And I guess that's probably a point I should get into. Is for me, getting into these bands also meant retracing my steps, right? So for a lot of traditional heavy metal fans, they maybe could listen to a band like In Solitude or The Wounded Kings. If you were listening to In Solitude, you'd think, yeah, this band's informed by Merciful Fate. This is a Doom record, and I'm thinking Saint Vitus. If you're listening to The Wounded Kings and you're kind of discovering Doom, the debut full length from Saint Vitus, I believe, is 84. And if you're, picking up this record like I was in 2008, and you don't know that much about, or you have not had a lot of Doom exposure, because you've been listening like I was predominantly for death metal and black metal and grindcore, this is going to be a record that points you in that direction. So, just like In Solitude bringing you to Merciful Fate, the Wounded Kings are gonna bring you to the debut full length from St. Vitus. They don't sound necessarily identical. I don't want to make that point, but I think they do serve as primary influences from that 83-84 era. Once again, 84, St. Vitus debut full length, important influence on the Wounded Kings and their debut full length. Next up, I mentioned, or I talked about this record before in a video, I believe was like a Love at First Listen. This is Pharaoh and Be Gone. The third full length, I believe, from Pharaoh. And this band, you know, is playing in a kind of melodic yet American power metal style. They're still active, putting out great albums, probably the most important American power metal band playing today, in my opinion. But this is my favorite record by Pharaoh. And, you know, if you think about American power metal in 83, 84, Alan, you know, is going to be all over Jag Panzer's Ample Destruction. And then probably another one that, you know, should be mentioned here is Hellstar. So Burning Star, 84. So if you're listening to Pharaoh and you don't know a lot about American power metal, you know, Jag Panzer and Hellstar are going to be important sort of references for you to go back to. Once again, those American power metal bands should serve as a source of influence for what is today the new wave of traditional heavy metal. I feel like a broken record. Here we go. Blood Ceremony. This is their debut full length. And if I'm listening to this, bands that I think they're influencing this sound from our era, I'm gonna say Witchfinder General. So they're kind of playing in this psychedelic yet doom kind of I don't know if you want to call it occultist heavy metal that's kind of traditional heavy metal yet also into this, you know, ritualistic psych laden doom. But Witchfinder General, I think absolutely their first two records, 83 and 84, I believe. Just looking at notes here, yeah. I think I thought I write it down. Perfect. Friends of Hell, yeah, 83. So, Blood Ceremony led me back to Witchfinder General. Should be part of the new wave of traditional heavy metal. Last, I know I just did a Wednesday album club on this band, but this is Battle Roar and To Death and Beyond. Right? Now, Alan kind of mentions this in the video with Eternal Champion and Visigoth, but the epic heavy metal side of things, it's in full force essentially by this time period. Manowar, Manila Road, Omen, all released records in this time period, 83, 84, and are clear influences on Battle Roar from Greece. You know, they should also be grouped in with that style, that sound. Once again, I didn't really want to make this too much about those records because they're the thrust of this video is rather a historical interpretation of what traditional heavy metal is. And just to give you, instead of thinking that bands that are playing in a Maiden or Judas Priest or Picture or Accept style, like that essentially corners as to what the new wave of traditional heavy metal can and can't be. I think it's fair that we should open up, if we think about that time period, in 83 and 84 and what was considered traditional heavy metal. It needs to also include Jag Panzer and Manowar and Saint Vitus and Witchfinder General and so on and so forth, right? Merciful Fate should be considered a important traditional heavy metal band and influence on bands today. Now, potentially we don't critically or we don't interpret them as traditional heavy metal due to the sort of change through the years, because we have better crystallized sort of divisions between subgenres. But I don't know if the bands that are playing now look at it that way. They are interested in that time period when it was a little bit less clear, or in the bands that were not as well known and were not filling stadiums. They are going back to those bands, those records, as sources of influence. So I just kind of wanted to get that out there and get my little, varying opinion. Once again, this was just meant to be sort of a exchange of ideas and how I look at this time period. I'm not trying to cause any drama. Hopefully it's all taken in good fun and healthy conversation and debate. So I couldn't put all of that into the comment section below in your video, Alan. So I thought I'd just get in front of the camera, let Atlantean Code explain the background, and let me rant about how I view that a little bit differently, and why potentially, different generations may have a very different lens to understand the era. So anyways, here I am doing a non-stream video entry. I've got some more stuff coming your way. I have a video that I need to edit for Brian and I. We did a part 2 to our Cut Your Teeth series, and later this year I'll have, I hope to have Brain Smasher get involved, and we'll do a conversation surrounding 2000s death metal. What you can see is we're starting to pack up our place right now. Corinne and I will be moving to our first home, getting out of an apartment, and I will have a dedicated listening room. So there'll be a change to the Killing for Company sort of experience, if you want to call it that. I will probably spend some time away, but after that I will get back to it soon enough, and you can usually catch me. I may take a break because of the move. But you can also catch me on Wednesdays over on Marty Worm's channel, the Heavy Metallurgy Wednesday Album Club. We sit down just on a weekly basis and talk about all sorts of records. Try and keep one another listening to something different that we're not used to. Please come and check that out. If you're looking on a Wednesday night, they're short. It's like an hour long, and we just kind of casually talk. So if you want to break midweek to talk a little bit of metal before the Friday long 3-hour Heavy Metallurgy episode, that's something for you to do. Until then, I'll probably see you guys soon. Thank you so much. Once again, Alan, I'll make sure to thank you so much for your video, your content, and I'll put a link to your channel below. Hopefully you get a chance to see this, and I'm interested to see what you think. Until then, I'll see you guys later. Bye.